Liberal Viewer presents.
So, welcome to the March 6th edition of Liberal Viewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. Give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you like what I'm doing. Today I'll be showing you the 12 dozen best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here for you and corporate media here in the United States, for which it'd be a really educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. As you can see from the video title, my topic is being tough doesn't reduce crime, being smart does. Being tough doesn't reduce crime, being smart does. And criminal justice, the criminal legal system is something I've spent a lot of time studying, working on, working in, and talking about on my YouTube channel. And I'm going to give some analysis of a topic that was very poorly covered on the Sunday morning news analysis shows. This came mostly from this District of Columbia crime or criminal code update that was the city council passed it, the mayor vetoed it, the city council overruled it, but because District of Columbia doesn't have home rule, the Congress can pass a bill overturning it, and the House has already done that. It looks like the Senate may do that, and the Biden administration has said they won't veto that bill. They will, even though they're for DC statehood and DC home rule, they're worried about being called soft on crime, and that it's so simplistic, it's so stupid. Being tough is not being smart on crime. It makes people feel better. It's like the simple solution. It's like something you can see, but you don't really see the long-term results. And I'm going to talk about that a lot more, and just some of the weird things we focus on in the criminal justice system or criminal legal system or whatever you want to call it. But anyway, before I get to all that, I did want to take a brief moment to play a political comedy clip. I saw one sort of reference to the criminal legal system in the cold open of Saturday Night Live on Saturday. They did a Fox and Friends parody that was kind of funny, and it was mostly about the Dominion lawsuit against Fox News. Fox News lied about Dominion voting machines, throwing the election to Biden from Trump in 2020, and they're being sued for like $1.6 billion. And I should really make a whole separate video on that. And I'm not even going to show you most of that. Down in the video description under sources, you can click on the link to watch the entire cold open on Saturday Night Live where they talk about that extensively. I just picked the part where they talked about a different, they talked about Rupert Murdoch's problems, but then there was a different Murdoch who had criminal problems, and then they had this very interesting criminal or crime expert at the end of the clip that I included. I sort of edited it down to like a minute and 20 seconds that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
We're talking about the Dominion voting machines lawsuit, and our boss, Rupert Murdoch, gave some pretty shocking testimony in the case.
This whole trial has been so unfair. They are raking him over the coals. Rupert Murdoch would never murder anyone.
Sorry, what?
They sent him away for life. Look how sad he looks. Now, where's that picture I found?
Oh, now, Ainsley, that's not Rupert Murdoch, that's Alex Murdaugh.
Well, we just blew the case wide open. They got the wrong guy.
Okay, I'll explain later. Anyway, Rupert Murdoch admitted that Fox News aired election fraud conspiracies to get ratings, even though everyone at Fox knew they were false.
Uh-oh, I didn't. Loop a brother in next time.
All right, okay. Well, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk more about the Alex Murdaugh sentencing with our Fox crime expert, O.J. Simpson.
What? Man, I don't know why everybody thinks I'm an expert on this. Shoot, booking me on the show without telling me why makes me so mad I could just... Nah, I'm okay. And, hey man, live from New York, it's Saturday night, you know?
Yeah, really like Kenan Thompson. I've said that he's one of my favorite, and he's the longest serving cast member at Saturday Night Live. And I think I said recently, like people say he's such a long-standing cast member. He doesn't have any like real memorable characters, which isn't true. But and I've heard like the greatest response to that is, yeah, his character in all the skits is the character that makes the skit work. Or actually, that skit worked with all of them. I always love or I generally like their Fox News parodies, and the Fox and Friends one was pretty good there. And it's actually not that big a stretch for O.J. Simpson to be a crime expert on Fox News, because one of the ridiculous things I see on Fox News every now and then is that one of their policing experts is Mark Furman. Mark Furman, who was like primarily responsible for O.J. Simpson's acquittal because he was like caught on tape saying racist slurs after he said under oath that he didn't, and he was like in charge of the investigation, and so they were able to like taint all the evidence that he helped collect. And anyway, the O.J. Simpson trial, though, I think is one of the turning points in the history of how the American politics views the criminal legal system. That was one of like the bad turning points where people thought the criminal system is too soft and lets people go, even though O.J. Simpson is not your typical defendant, and most defendants don't go to trial. And uh, the whole idea that more punishment creates less crime, uh, it just isn't backed up by the facts. I mean, putting people in cages generally, especially if you're going to let them out eventually, doesn't really solve any problems. That's why recidivism rates are so high, because the incarceration doesn't solve the problem. If you're eventually going to let people out anyway, there are so many better ways to solve crime. And uh, while the causes of crime are really complex, and it's hard to like it's multifactored, and it's not easy to quantify. One of the things that is easy to quantify is the fact that the so-called progressive prosecutor movement that I hear uh, attacked on Fox News all the time, that the soft on crime Democrats are causing this crime wave that happened after the pandemic. There has been some increase in crime, although that's also been overblown somewhat. But on that point, down in the video description, I put a link to this Brennan Center for Justice article titled Myths and Realities, Understanding Recent Trends in Violent Crime. And one of the things you can see if you look at that page is this paragraph. Despite politicized claims that the rise in crime was the result of criminal justice reform in liberal-leaning jurisdictions, murders rose roughly equally in cities run by Republicans, cities run by Democrats. Red states actually saw some of the highest murder rates of all. So you can't really blame it on soft on crime Democrats. That's one of the ridiculous things. And one of the other things I wanted to point out, I have this book behind me right here called Unusual Cruelty by Alex Karakatsanis, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. And I wanted to point out some of the points, something he said on page 56 and 57 of that book. Here, this might be a little small for you to see. So, but he's talking about here how we choose the crimes that we enforce and the ones that we don't based on a lot of times who's powerful. We don't enforce crimes on the elites, on big corporations. It's, the poor, the marginalized. So like on the left side of that page, for example, you can see Henry Kissinger has never been charged for his war crimes by American prosecutors despite uncontroverted evidence of them. Or, last week we talked about Condoleezza Rice possibly being a war criminal and how she wasn't prosecuted. And not only was Henry Kissinger never prosecuted, but I actually had this weird occasion to go to the Richard Nixon Library this last weekend. Believe it or not, a more distant relative of mine had a bar mitzvah reception there, which is kind of weird because Richard Nixon is on tape making anti-Semitic statements. But here you can see me sitting behind a replica of Richard Nixon's Oval Office desk. And one of the things I noticed there was not only was Kissinger and Nixon not prosecuted for war crimes, they had this like whole interactive thing where like you could decide if you would make the same choices that Nixon did. Like, here's the tough choices. Would you decide to bomb Cambodia? And you can like go through this whole interactive exhibit thing and decide if you would bomb Cambodia. But those are some of the crimes that aren't prosecuted. Or think of corporations. Here's like an example from from page 57 of that book. From 2004 to 2009, there were over 500,000 violations of the Clean Water Act, resulting in rotting teeth, cancer, kidney failure, damage to the nervous system. About 1 in 10 Americans were exposed to dangerous chemicals in drinking waters. Prosecutors chose to ignore the vast majority of these crimes, admitting when confronted that their enforcement of these laws are unacceptably low. And actually, you're finally going to see some news coverage this week about that Ohio train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. And that probably did result in a criminal violation of the Clean Water Act, but nobody talks about that as a crime, or the fact that the railroad there, the Norfolk Southern Railroad Company, that corporation could probably be prosecuted, but is anyone even talking about that? No. So I just wanted to make those preliminary educational comments before we watch the newsmaker clips. And I'm also going to show you the panel discussions are really biased against real smart on crime reforms that make investments in communities to alleviate poverty and to stop people from being dislocated. That's one of the worst things about putting people in jail and prison is you take them away from whatever support networks there's study after study that shows how poorly mass incarceration solves crime problems. But the police, I've talked about the propaganda network so many times that the police, when crime goes up, police say we need more police. When crime goes down, police are doing a good job. We need more police. It's like always the answer is more police, even though the evidence for over punishment and over policing actually decreasing crime, the evidence just isn't there. And I'll talk about that more after I get through some of these news summaries. They're on some different topics. A couple of them focus on this. The first one is ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where you'll see George Stephanopoulos and their reporter Gio Benetiz talk about the Ohio train derailment. And finally, there's some news coverage of this huge breach of the public trust by this corporation. But you'll notice no talk of, we're being soft on crime by letting them get away with this. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that first news summary together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. As we come on the air this morning, Ohio is dealing with another train derailment. 20 cars of a Norfolk Southern train derailed late yesterday afternoon in Springfield. President Biden and Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg have been in touch with Ohio's governor. A shelter-in-place order has now been lifted, and officials say no hazardous spillage occurred. But it comes amid a flurry of recent transit scares, growing anger in East Palestine about the handling of last month's toxic derailment, and multiple serious close calls that have raised questions about aviation safety. Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown is standing by. There he is right there. But transportation correspondent Gio Benetiz starts us off. Good morning, Gio.
George, the second derailment only adds to the growing problems facing Norfolk Southern, whose CEO is set to testify later this week. He's going to face Congress 1 month after the disaster in East Palestine, which still has many residents calling for answers and demanding to be evacuated. More than a month after that train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, residents still infuriated with the response.
Do I have to wait until I have cancer, or my kids are sick, or my grandkids are sick, before you guys are going to do anything?
And the incident's still sending shockwaves through national politics. Just this week, Ohio Governor, Republican Mike DeWine, calling on President Biden to visit.
Look, he should come. There's no doubt about it. The president needs to come.
Biden responding.
I will be answering.
This comes after furious Republican criticism of Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg for not visiting soon enough. Florida Senator Marco Rubio tweeting, Buttigieg needs to be fired.
What I tried to do was balance two things: my desire to be involved and engaged, allowing NTSB to really lead. I'll do some thinking about whether I got that balance right.
Democrats firing back, blaming congressional Republicans for interfering with regulations, saying they've allowed the train industry to largely regulate itself. Earlier this week, a bipartisan group of 6 senators introducing new rail safety legislation requiring rail companies to notify state emergency response officials if they're transporting hazardous materials, increase inspections, raise fines for breaking rules, and mandate a 2-person crew. It would also require that the wheels on trains carrying hazmat must be scanned for heat every 10 miles. The NTSB says an overheated wheel bearing likely caused the derailment in East Palestine. Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown saying in a statement, it shouldn't take a massive railroad disaster for elected officials to put partisanship aside and work together. And after that heated town hall in East Palestine.
But you know what? Norfolk is a Goliath, and we are no match.
We are sorry. We're very sorry for that.
Norfolk Southern CEO set to testify before a Senate committee next week. This coming in the midst of other transportation concerns, a series of close calls nationwide, prompting the FAA to launch an air safety review. Last week, Biden's nominee for the FAA at his confirmation hearing saying safety is his top priority.
We cannot think about doing things the old way. And so I think that a fresh perspective is needed.
And the FAA now says it will hold a special safety summit on March 15th in Virginia with leaders from the aviation industry to figure out what is broken and how to fix it. Meanwhile, the EPA has ordered Norfolk Southern to start testing the area in East Palestine for toxic dioxins. The company has started removing about 2,000 feet of railroad tracks to get rid of contaminated soil underneath George.
Okay, Gio, thanks. Let's get more on this now from Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown. Senator Brown, thanks for joining us this morning. Appreciate you coming in. Want to start out, do you have any update on that derailment?
And I don't have a clip of Sherrod Brown because I'm sticking on my tough on crime versus soft on crime versus smart on crime issue. And I'll be showing panel discussions from ABC and NBC and newsmakers from CNN and CBS talking about this. And most of them not doing a very good job of talking about the real issues. But, I mean, at least there was some coverage of this train derailment. I was criticizing the corporate news media for not covering this huge threat to public health posed by this other corporation, the railroad corporation that you saw there is Norfolk Southern Railroad, responsible for this derailment and responsible for 4 train derailments in the last 5 months. You'll see when I get to the CBS News Face of the Nation news summary, the shortest one. So the longest one and the shortest one this week actually do focus on the train derailment. The Fox News Sunday news summary is like different from any of the others. It focuses on foreign policy challenges faced by the Biden administration. It talks about Ukraine in a way that kind of supports those Republicans who want to limit U.S. aid to Ukraine and are questioning the Biden administration's war there, which, I mean, that's one point of view, obviously, but it's the Republican point of view, or at least some in the Republican Party, just part of Fox News being a propaganda outlet of the Republican Party, which actually that goes back to the political comedy clip I showed at the beginning, the Fox and Friends parody where they were talking about the Dominion lawsuit. That is, I've seen so many pundits this last week say that this shows Fox News as a propaganda outlet of the Republican Party. Like, maybe some of them have heard me say that or have read the book over here by Gabriel Sherman, The Loudest Voice in the Room, that shows Roger Ailes created the Republican Party to be, created Fox News to be a propaganda outlet for the Republican Party. And one of the like dead giveaways in this clip from Luke, it's Shannon Bream doing the intro, and then their reporter Lucas Tomlinson talking mostly about foreign policy challenges. Then at the end, they talk about like the 2024 campaign opening up with both Biden and some Republicans like Trump at CPAC. And what clip did they choose to show from Biden? The one clip from Biden they choose is, I promise to raise some taxes. I promise to raise some taxes. So, I mean, could you have any better indicator of the Fox News bias than that? You can let me know what you think down in the comment section as we watch the Fox News Sunday news summary together from yesterday over here.
Hello from Fox News in Washington. The president met with top Democrats this week as he thinks through his 2024 strategy, but foreign policy challenges continue to push his domestic plans to the side. Breaking overnight, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs visiting U.S. troops in Syria. General Milley is there to talk about U.S. efforts to prevent a resurgence of ISIS. Syria's foreign ministry condemned the unannounced trip. They're calling it a flagrant violation of Syrian sovereignty. His trip comes as Russia, China, and the U.S. all jockey for global influence. In a moment, Virginia Senator Mark Warner joins us live on the war in Ukraine, on China, and a new U.S. intel assessment about the mysterious Havana syndrome. But first, let's turn to Lucas Tomlinson live at the White House on those dueling meetings held by President Biden and Chinese President Xi. Lucas.
Shannon, U.S. officials privately admit the war in Ukraine is at a stalemate right now. The front lines haven't changed in months, despite billions of dollars of American weapons flowing into the country over the past year.
Russian forces making incremental gains assaulting the eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut. That's where Ukrainian President Zelensky visited shortly before flying to the White House and presenting this flag to Congress in December. Friday, President Biden hosted his German counterpart, with Ukraine dominating the discussions.
Beyond your military support, the moral support you gave to the Ukrainians has been profound.
Despite both sides approving tanks for Ukraine, U.S. officials admit few have been sent more than a month since the announcement. Today, Russian forces control 17% of Ukraine, and there are more Russian troops inside Ukraine now than any time in the past year. In late January, the U.S. military's top officer admitted getting the Russians out of Ukraine this year would be, quote, very, very difficult. Only about half the 20 leading economies in the world are sanctioning Russia. India has increased its oil imports. At the G20 summit in New Delhi, Russia's top diplomat made the following claim, immediately rebuked by the audience.
The war which we are trying to stop and which was launched against us using Ukraine.
One of the biggest concerns in Washington, China potentially arming the Russians.
We haven't seen the Chinese make this decision. We don't think they've taken it off the table.
The president also met with Democrats late last week on Capitol Hill. The backdrop, his potential re-election bid and his annual budget rollout this week. President Biden already making this pledge.
I want to make it clear, I'm going to raise some taxes. Many of you are billionaires out there, you're going to stop paying at 3%.
Right now, former President Donald Trump leads Biden in the polls in a potential rematch in 2024. Trump spoke last night for nearly 2 hours outside the nation's capital at the Conservative Political Action Conference, better known as CPAC. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was among a handful of prominent Republicans who did not attend. Shannon?
Yeah, we'll have more on that with the panel coming up. Lucas Tomlinson from the White House. Lucas, thank you. Joining us now, Virginia Democratic Senator Mark Warner, chairman.
And I don't have a clip of Senator Mark Warner talking mostly about China, but about a bunch of other things. You can see the entire program at the link I put under sources in the video description, going to Fox News Sunday if you want to see Mark Warner. Like I said, I'm focusing on this soft on crime, tough on crime, smart on crime controversy and how it was covered in the corporate news media you saw not much coverage there, but I'm going to show the Fox News panel discussion about it, which was very one-sided. Even there was someone representing the left there, but it was Juan Williams, and he, like Karl Rove and Juan Williams, ended up like patting each other on the back because they had their kumbaya moment, both agreeing, and I'll get to that. That's clip number 10. If you, oh, by the way, down in the video description under media mentioned, I have a list of all of my 12 clips with brief summaries of what's in each of the clips. We've watched the first two of the news summaries. The next one is NBC News's Meet the Press. I'm going from longest to shortest. Chuck Todd here pretty much focuses on the issue that I've titled my video with, the whole crime issue, and he looks at the Biden administration saying that they won't veto this bill that would take away the District of Columbia's right to reform their criminal code. He looks at that as like a political issue, showing that the 2024 campaign is beginning and Biden is trying to not be framed as soft on crime. And then there's a little coverage of Ukraine at the end of this news summary, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good Sunday morning. This may be the week where we saw the 2024 presidential campaign kick into full gear. And not just on the Republican side. President Biden's decision to block a D.C. crime law caught many Democrats off guard because it's going to be the first time in 30 years that Congress has nullified a law in D.C. And it's a Democratic president and a Democratic Senate. But if you view it through the lens of political calculation, it may make perfect sense. President Biden decided that neither he nor his party, with a big Senate map to defend, with a lot of red areas to defend, could afford to look soft on crime heading into 2024. Republicans tried to make crime a central issue in the 2022 midterms, and they certainly had some success in New York State and a few other areas. But the results this week in the Chicago mayor's race, where voters fired the incumbent, are a reminder that crime and policing are still important to urban voters as well, a huge part of the Democratic coalition. Democrats have been twisted in knots on the crime issue because it's a problem with swing voters, and Biden is trying to provide them with a way forward. The mirror image of sort of being twisted in knots for Republicans is the abortion issue, but no one in the GOP, at least to date, is taking the lead to try and come up with a modified solution to that political problem for them. If anything, the Republicans are more fractured, and not just on the abortion issue, but about the general direction of the party. It's a divide that has been on full display this weekend. But there's one issue where there is little divide these days, and it is on China, with its rising national security threats. The Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, issued yet another direct warning to China about sending lethal aid to Russia for the war in Ukraine.
China can't have it both ways. It can't be putting itself out as a force for peace in public, while it, one way or another, continues to fuel the flames of this fire that Vladimir Putin started.
So we want to dig deeper into this. Joining me now are the chair and ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, appearing here together, Republican Congressman Mike Turner of Ohio and Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut.
So yeah, if you want to see Mike Turner and Jim Himes and their discussion with Chuck Todd, go to the link under sources in the video description that goes to Meet the Press. I don't have clips of that because I'm going to show the Meet the Press panel discussion about the soft on crime, tough on crime, smart on crime issue that you saw Chuck Todd deal with at the beginning of his news summary as like a setup for the 2024 election. And then he also mentioned this issue that I've been talking about the last couple weeks, whether China is going to give lethal aid to Russia in their invasion of Ukraine, and the foreign policy issue that I did cover that the last couple weeks. That's why I decided to sort of pivot to this issue that is like a big focus of what I've worked on for pretty much my entire career, or as it's gone through its various circuitous pathways. But anyway, that was a fairly good news summary, and it still covered some of the stuff you saw in the Fox News Sunday biased summary, but also looked at this criminal justice or criminal legal issue. But when I get to the panel discussion from NBC News Meet the Press, they don't cover it very well. It's all, it's very much framed in the tough on crime, soft on crime, no real mention of being smart on crime. And then here's the second to last news summary, CNN State of the Union, very similar to the NBC News Meet the Press one, but just sort of half as long. And I'll talk about it a little more after we watch together over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in New York this morning, where our State of the Union is gearing up. This weekend, we are beginning to see messages for both parties take shape ahead of the 2024 presidential campaign. Half a dozen Republican hopefuls, including former President Trump, spoke at dueling political events this weekend, jabbing each other over government spending and cultural issues. As many in the GOP look for a way to bypass Donald Trump, even as polls show he is still the man to beat. We also saw President Biden preview his likely campaign message, urging Democrats at a party conference to focus on their successes over the last 2 years in a time of newly divided government. While his party faced urgent new questions about crime in traditionally Democratic big cities as Democrats hope to flip the House and regain unified control in 2024. Here with me now is House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. Thank you so much. It's
And I will have a clip of Hakeem Jeffries. I'll actually have two newsmaker clips from CNN State of the Union, and it shows like the two sides of the Democratic Party, Hakeem Jeffries versus Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, and neither one of them is really talking about being smart on crime, like in the, investing in communities in ways that prevent crime from occurring in the first place, alleviating poverty, giving education, giving job opportunities, letting people have, mental health coverage and, all the things that make communities healthy, both physically, mentally, economically. Those are the real, long-term crime prevention strategies, not locking up people in cages, not throwing people away and saying they're worthless and dehumanizing them and calling them criminals when they're really human beings who have value. And anyway, I'm going off on my rant here when I don't really need to, and I really should be finishing the news summaries. CBS News Face the Nation has the shortest of the news summaries. It's actually kind of similar to the This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary, focusing on Ohio train derailments, actually pointing out there have been 4 of the Norfolk Southern Corporation's trains have derailed. 4 of them have derailed in the last 5 months in Ohio. And I'll talk about that clip a little more, the final news summary that I will watch with you today over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. Saturday's Norfolk Southern derailment in Springfield, Ohio, was the 4th train derailment in Ohio in the last 5 months, including the one in East Palestine that spilled toxic chemicals. Norfolk Southern tells CBS News that no one was injured and no toxic substances were on board the train involved in yesterday's incident. The CEO of Norfolk Southern is expected to testify before a Senate panel on Thursday. We want to begin the show with Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, who joins us.
And yeah, if you want to see the interview with Joe Manchin, as I point out most weeks, CBS News Face the Nation splits up their program almost completely. I think this week the entire program is available for free, split up into segments on their YouTube channel at the link I put under sources in the video description, including the interview with Joe Manchin. But I'm going to show you a clip from CBS News's Face the Nation. The next clip is a Democrat, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, talking about this supposed big loss for liberal policies on crime in Chicago. The mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, was the first Chicago mayor in 40 years not to win a second term, who was running for a second term. She lost in the primary. There are a couple, both the two candidates trying to replace her are Democrats. And I'm going to give kudos to Face the Nation for sort of debunking this claim, and I've heard it on Fox News like over and over and over again, that the reason Lori Lightfoot lost as Chicago mayor is because she didn't deal with the crime issue, because she was soft on crime. But actually there were like a couple competing issues, and one of the people who is vying to replace Lori Lightfoot is actually softer on crime, more progressive on crime. And one of the other big issues was the teacher unions. And anyway, that's pointed out in this questioning of J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, about what happened in Chicago, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that brief clip together over here.
I want to ask you as well about crime as an issue for Democrats. In the city of Chicago, the mayor, Lori Lightfoot, just failed to make the runoff in the Democratic primary. She was challenged by a former school CEO backed by a police union and the Cook County commissioner who was endorsed by the Chicago Teachers Union. So I'm wondering what the takeaway message is here for Democrats. Is it don't take on the teachers unions, as she did, or is it to focus more on violent crime?
Well, it was a messy primary. There's no doubt about it. 9 candidates. Nobody got 50% or anywhere near 50%. So we have a runoff coming up. I think that these two candidates have to make sure that their messages are clear, what they're going to do to protect health care, what they're going to do to address crime. Frankly, they have not been specific on a lot of these issues, and I'm asking them to be.
Governor, thank you very much for your time.
So yeah, that was like an add-on, a brief question really at the end, and not a lot of details there, but at least Margaret Brennan pointed out that Lori Lightfoot might not have lost that election because she was soft on crime. There was the whole teacher union issue, and it's a lot more complex than that. But when it comes to lack of complexity, I'm kind of disappointed in this next clip. Well, I have two clips here from CNN State of the Union, both Democrats. One is the House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries responding to questions from Dana Bash on CNN State of the Union about the Biden administration's statement that they're not going to veto this bill that would overturn the District of Columbia's overhaul of their criminal code that some people say is soft on crime, which isn't really true. But Hakeem Jeffries doesn't really defend it. He won't even admit that that's what the Biden administration is going to do. And he doesn't really defend progressive policies. And then the next Democrat is the mayor of New York, Eric Adams, who does an even worse job. But let's watch the Hakeem Jeffries interview with Dana Bash, and I'll talk about it a little more with you after we watch that clip together over here.
So you talk about unity. I want to ask you about something that happened this past week. Showed some pretty stark divisions in your Democratic Party because President Biden unexpectedly announced that he's going to sign a Republican effort to override a new crime reform bill in Washington, D.C. 173 House Democrats, including yourself, voted against that GOP bill. And in large part, that was because you believe that the White House signaled that the president would oppose it. So did President Biden pull the rug out from under you and your fellow House Democrats?
Not at all. We have a House, we have a Senate, and then we have the White House. In terms of my particular reasons for voting the way that I did, one, I believe that local government should have control over local matters. And that's a principle that I've supported from the moment that I arrived in Washington, D.C. It's one of the reasons why I believe in D.C. statehood. And in this particular case, I voted to affirm local rule.
Right, but the Democratic president has signaled that he doesn't agree with that, and he's going to sign a Republican bill to override what you just described. Are you okay with that?
Well, let's take it one step at a time. We have to see what happens in the United States Senate next week. Depending on what the Senate does, the president will have to respond one way or the other. I haven't had an opportunity to talk to the White House yet about the president's views, so I'm not going to characterize his position one way or the other until we've had a chance to talk
he said it.
about that issue.
I mean, he's made it clear it's not, unless he just changes his tune again.
Well, there are public conversations and there are private conversations.
So you think you're going to be able
to have a private conversation? What I do know is that Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton has said she looks forward to talking to President Biden about his position. They may agree to disagree. And at the end of the day, that's fine. Because on the big picture issues and fighting to build an economy that really does work for everyday Americans, we will remain unified, particularly as compared to the extremism that we're seeing on the other side of the aisle.
Okay, you're the Democratic leader. I obviously am not. If I'm hearing from frustrated House Democrats, I can't imagine what you're hearing. They feel like the White House, again, pulled the rug out from under them. You have to be hearing that.
Well, that actually has not been the sense that I've gotten. I think coming out of the issues conference, we are incredibly unified about the way forward. When we talk about putting people over politics, that is not just a slogan. It's a way of life for us. It's what we've done. It's the reason why we were able to pass historic legislation to save the economy, to invest in infrastructure, to bring manufacturing jobs back home to the country, to do something about the climate and the environment and prescription drug prices.
On this issue, then we can move on. Would it be a mistake for President Biden to sign this bill overriding the decision by a city that is 50% African American on how to govern itself on the issue of crime?
Well, I don't want to characterize what President Biden may or may not do.
But would it be a mistake?
Well, in response to something that the Senate has not even done yet, what I can say is that I'll continue to support the principle of local government control over local matters. There are more than 700,000 people in the District of Columbia. They elect the city council, they elect the mayor. They can continue to work out those issues.
Do you think that part of this is the White House and some of those Senate Democrats you were talking about who are worried about tough reelection campaigns being worried about Democrats portrayed as soft on crime?
No, actually, I think we have a strong record on the issue. We passed gun safety legislation over the objections of the NRA for the first time in 30 years that will save lives. We have to do more. We certainly have a vision for doing more, for banning weapons of war on our streets, for enacting universal criminal background check legislation, for investing in dealing with mental illness, as our gun safety legislation will do to the tune of $500 million. And so I think we can lean into this issue moving forward based on substance.
You recently went down to the border. You had a firsthand.
So, yeah, there you can see the House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, not really making any arguments about being smart on crime and like ending mass incarceration. If you want to know more about mass incarceration, I'm just looking over my shoulder. It says it's supposed to say the new Jim Crow, but you can't see the O and the W, and there's like too much of a gap. Hold on a second. I'm gonna fix this. While the whole thing is, I can't even reach it. Oh, here we go. There you go. New Jim Crow. Geez. If you want to know about the history of mass incarceration and why the whole thing is a stupid right-wing white supremacist idea that solves no social problems but creates the white supremacist order that is supposed to be, that can exist in the colorblind era, the post-Jim Crow era, where you don't refer to people by their race, you refer to them as criminals, but we all know who we're talking about, and the criminal justice or criminal legal system definitely knows who we're talking about, and look who actually gets scooped up. It's not Henry Kissinger, it's not Richard Nixon, and maybe it's not O.J. Simpson because he got lucky because he was rich, but it's people who look a lot more like O.J. Simpson than Henry Kissinger. Anyway, the point being that that argument about the criminal legal system was not made by Hakeem Jeffries at all. He made the one argument that it's the easy political argument. It's not educating the public. The one like easy political argument that Democrats have is they're the ones who are going to take the guns off the streets, and the guns are responsible for a lot of the crimes. And it's like, where the simple answer for Democrats is get rid of the guns, and the simple answer for Republicans is get rid of the people. Get rid of the people who are committing the crimes. And I mean, I don't have that big a problem with getting rid of the guns. I have a problem with getting rid of the people because, like I was saying before, they're like human beings with value, and we can't throw them away and label them as criminals. And not even Henry Kissinger, not even Condoleezza Rice. Well, whatever. I mean, they're also human beings, although they at least, or unlike the people in prison, they haven't been punished at all. So you can't say they've been overpunished if maybe there are some people who are underpunished. But I mean, I would rather see everybody punished less rather than focusing on punishing some people more. But anyway, the next clip I already promised is another Democrat, even more pro-police. In fact, a former police officer, mayor of New York, running as a Democrat. That's the thing. A lot of Democrats, people think like the Democrats are defund the police and soft on crime. And the truth is, a lot of Democrats in the cities, I'm here in Sacramento where our city council does all this stuff to support the police, not to mention Sacramento County, which has a much larger budget and is even more pro-police than Sacramento City. And there are a lot of and for the last several years, the city and the county have had a majority of Democrats. I think the county just switched to maybe a majority Republican, but the point being that Democrats and Republicans elected officials tend to be really pro-cop. I mean, even the ones who want police reform, they want more training, more money, give more to the police to make them better. There's very few Democrats, maybe like Cori Bush from St. Louis. There very few who want to defund the police or even like reallocate resources to like mental health providers for some things, or stop the police from engaging in traffic enforcement. That's a good idea I heard recently at some local events I went to. And I mean, but anyway, I'm going off on a progressive reform to the criminal legal system rant, and I'm criticizing Mayor Eric Adams, who is a former police officer and is all in on being tough on crime, as I'll talk about it a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
I want to talk about what happened in Chicago this week. Your friend, Mayor Lori Lightfoot, she had a pretty big loss in her reelection bid. You work closely together on a range of issues, particularly on questions of crime. That is an issue that dominated the election in Chicago. What is your takeaway from her loss?
Well, I think all of our big cities, I like to say we have three parties, Democrat, Republicans, and mayors. Mayors, we're the closest to the problems. And I stated on the campaign trail and in the city, public safety is a prerequisite to prosperity. Same as Chicago, like New York, and many of our big cities across America. That is why we're zero focus, double-digit decrease in shootings, double-digit decrease in homicides. We have witnessed this year, particularly in the month of February, all of our index crimes is low for the entire year. We are focused on public safety because people want to be safe. They don't feel safe and they're actually safe, then you're going to lose control of your city.
Is what happened to her a warning sign for you here in New York?
To the contrary, I think it's a warning sign for the country. Eric Adams has been talking about public safety, not only on the campaign trail, but for the first year. I showed up at crime scenes. I knew what New Yorkers were saying, and I saw it all over the country. I think, if anything, it is really stating that this is what I have been talking about. America, we have to be safe.
The question sort of on the flip side of this is some of the data you talked about. NYPD shows that some crimes like assault and car theft rose slightly in February. Compared to other crime in the past, overall crime is down here in New York City. But you also have people like former Congressman Mondaire Jones, who will actually be on the show later. He says that the rhetoric that you talk about a lot with regard to crime kind of feeds the narrative and helps Republicans. make the point that there is too much crime and that hurts Democrats. Your response?
You know the difference between a comment like that and what I say. I listen to Americans and New Yorkers. The polls were clear. New Yorkers felt unsafe, and the numbers show that they were unsafe. Now, if we want to ignore what the everyday public is stating, then that's up to them. I'm on the subways. I walk the streets. I speak to everyday working class people, and they were concerned about safety. We zeroed in on that. Unprecedented historic numbers of felony arrests, removal of guns on our streets, closing homicide cases. We have a recidivism problem in New York. And far too many people, there's about 2,000 people who are repeatedly catch, release, repeat in crimes. If we don't take them off our streets, they're going to continue to prey on innocent people.
I wonder what, I know New York City and Washington, D.C. are very different because you have your own your ability to rule here, basically. And D.C. has a situation where Congress can override a bill. And it sounds like the president might sign a Republican bill to override a new crime bill that the mayor and others in D.C. put in place. Do you think that that is the right way to approach it, given what you just said about sort of the mayors having a different job than everybody else?
The mayors have a unique job. People bump into the mayor, particularly mayor like me, on the streets. Yeah, and I think,
should the federal government stay out of the business of the D.C. government when it comes to crime?
Well, that's the way our country operates, and dealing with that is not up to me. I have to focus on how do I partner with my state lawmakers and my city council here to show them how imperative it is that we are safe.
I want to ask about some comments that you made at an interfaith.
Oh, and then like the next part, Dan Abash asks Mayor Eric Adams about this thing he said at a prayer breakfast about being against the separation of church and state. So if you want to see that, go to the link in the under sources, the video description. I don't think he defends that very well, but they were really happy about it on Fox News. I saw multiple references to it today on Fox News, how Eric Adams doesn't believe in the separation of church and state either. So anyway, that was a pretty bad response. And Eric Adams said we have a recidivism problem. People who are let out of jail and prison often end up back in jail and prison. Doesn't that tell you that jail and prison doesn't help? Other than separating people from society for a certain period of time, as a short-term solution, it is not a long-term solution. That's the whole point. That mass incarceration does not solve the crime problem. Investment in our communities, in their health, their economic health, their physical health, their mental health, their educational health, their social health, all the ways that you make communities healthy and prosperous and with very robust social safety nets and community resources, and that doesn't prevent crime. Even rich people commit crimes. I started off with like the Alex Murdaugh clip from Fox and Friends. I'm not saying that if everyone was, rich and healthy and prosperous, that no crime would exist. But if you wanted to lower crime, not eliminate crime, that's what increases the amount of crime is those poor social and economic and of course the institutional racism and all of the new Jim Crow stuff I was talking about. Oh, sorry, wrong way. This way over here. And then the stuff that in unusual cruelty that I talked about over here. Those are some important resources to look at. But anyway, that's the last of the newsmaker clips, but I wanted to show the 3 panel discussions from Fox News Sunday, NBC News Meet the Press, and ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where they did a really bad job of covering this issue. The only person who like mentioned any of the real issues beyond, the political, tough on crime, soft on crime. NBC News Meet the Press talks about like the gun issue. Democrats can use the gun issue to be not soft on crime, but only Donna Brazile in the final clip I'm going to show talks about some of the real issues. The worst one, of course, is Fox News Sunday, where both Karl Rove, who like might be a war criminal for being involved in like the George W. Bush administration and their invasion of Iraq and their torture of people after 9/11. Those are some crimes that were never prosecuted. We talked about Condoleezza Rice earlier. He like talks about this whole crime issue with Juan Williams, and they both agree that we have to stop the soft on crime people in the District of Columbia. And Juan Williams apparently lives there, and his Juan Williams' wife was a crime victim, so he's like on the same side, and they have this kumbaya. This is how Fox News covers stuff, and I'll talk about it a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
France is voting no on this particular measure. Quickly, I want to do this. D.C. home rule. So D.C. Council had changed the criminal laws here. It was going to lessen penalties for some things. There was a big backlash on this. House and Senate have a right over this federal district to say, we're not going to do that. They've overturned this. The president says he won't veto it. And frankly, Carl, Democrats are mad. They say the president this proves that D.C. needs statehood.
Yeah, well, he's saving them from themselves. The D.C. law would do away with mandatory minimum sentences for many violent crimes. It would elevate low-ranking crimes to have jury trials, which would discourage people from being charged. And then it would reduce the penalties for burglary, carjacking, robbery, and some other things. The president of the United States is doing his party a favor by keeping the soft on crime label being able to be slapped on them with ease, as it would be if the Democrats oppose this.
Well, so I think in reality, the Republicans are trying to put Biden and Democrats in a box, and as Carl said, I think the president avoided the trap. By the way, I'm a D.C. resident. Yep. My wife has been carjacked. I think this is a bad bill. The president did right.
Okay.
Good for you.
All right. Look, they end on a moment of kumbaya.
Kumbaya.
Okay.
Kumbaya.
Thank you, panel. We'll see you. We'll see you next.
A moment of kumbaya on Fox News, where everybody agrees on mass incarceration or the DC criminal code update. It hasn't been updated since 1901, and you'll hear Donna Brazile explain in the clip after next. But this next news summary, I cut out a little bit of what Jay Johnson said because he was responding to like a previous discussion on the issue of like the threat of the classified documents that Trump and Biden had in their personal residences, and so I cut that part out. But otherwise, here is like an almost 6-minute panel discussion on NBC News's Meet the Press with several different people, but nobody really makes the argument that putting people in cages doesn't solve the problem of crime, that over-punishment and over-policing and a racist criminal legal system does not solve the problem of crime. That doesn't come up here. The only like Democrat argument, or the argument for Democrats to make, is we're not soft on crime because we want to take away guns. And not that that's a bad argument, and maybe politically that is the best argument, but it's not the truth. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch this penultimate news clip together today over here.
All of you. Hallie, I want to start with what I think was the first, we're talking about the presidential races gearing up on the Republican side. But President Biden, what he did in, I guess you could call it a triangulation on crime. Yeah. We may be nullifying the first law in D.C. Here, I want to play what Muriel Bowser's reaction was to this. I interviewed her on Friday. Let me play her reaction, and let's talk about it on the other side.
The president had issued a pretty direct and very supportive statement of administration about D.C. autonomy, and we wholeheartedly agree. President Biden has been a vocal supporter of D.C. home rule and statehood for Washington, and I vetoed the bill. Unfortunately, we live with the indignity of limited home rule in the District of Columbia.
All right, this is quickly, I'm going to try to get through this fast. It's complicated. D.C. did a rewrite of part of its criminal code. Mayor Bowser vetoed it. The city council overturned her veto, 12-1, mind you. And then Congress does have the ability, the House side it does, and they're essentially vetoing the overrule of the veto and nullifying this law, or at least they will. What's interesting here is progressives have been muted in their criticism of the president. It looks like he made the right call here because the party's sort of backing off. Mario Bowser was not ready to criticize him for doing this.
Well, I mean, I will tell you there is still a real sense of anger among some Democratic members of Congress who are, in the words of one person that I talked to just yesterday, supremely pissed by what they saw as a surprisingly incompetent move. Again, I'm quoting here, by the White House to, as you say, triangulate this way. I think there is a sense, and I've talked with current and former White House officials who believe that this is anger that will essentially blow over on the politics piece of it. But I've heard questions raised about the credibility that the White House has now moving forward when there might be other tough votes. Look at what the NRCC, the Republican campaign arm, is doing, putting out, this sort of statement saying, hey, the ad scripts write themselves for these dozens of Democrats who took a tough vote on an issue that has been tough for Democrats. I think there is an acknowledgement from Democrats. They're not where they want to be on crime. I've been encouraged by Democratic sources to look at it through the lens of the midterms in places like Pennsylvania, where Democrats did well, where crime was an issue. That, of course, disregards a place like Wisconsin, where that wasn't the case.
Or New York.
Right.
You know, it's interesting here, Jay Johnson. Look, there were 31 Democrats that did vote with the Republicans on this issue in the House. 20 of the 31 won by less than, with 55% of the vote or less on this. The anger coming from House Democrats are folks who thought, wait a minute, you were going to provide cover? You're providing cover for Bob Casey Jr.? You were going to provide cover? I wish you would have told me. I might have voted differently.
Okay, so Democrats in crime, I've written op-eds on this. I think Joe Biden and Muriel Bowser are absolutely right. Democrats lose elections, particularly presidents and mayors, who are perceived as soft on crime, in blue communities. And it bears emphasis that in big cities, crime is the uppermost issue. Just ask people on MLK Avenue, across the river in Anacostia, Michigan Avenue, in South Chicago. Crime is an intensely personal issue, and they want to see their leaders address it. This is how we got Rudy Giuliani, in 1993 in New York City.
Speaking of Republican mayors of blue cities, you were one.
Absolutely. In the 93, 95 to 2000, Giuliani, Daley, McCrory, Mike Turner, from Dayton. We had mayors, Republicans and Democrats, who were tough on crime because the gangs were taking over our cities, drug trade was taking over our cities, the homelessness was taking over our city, and we took aggressive action. And as a result, we had large drops in especially the murder rate and the gang activity, and it was coordinated with the federal government enforcing federal gun laws. And then, for whatever reason, the left took over the cities and the Democratic Party nationally, and the crime rate went up because we started letting career criminals back on the street.
And it's not...
And they're paying for it right now, and they deserve to pay for it.
Democrats, it's not like Democrats don't have an argument here. And Democrats, respectfully, Governor, Democrats are the ones that want to get guns off the streets.
You know, Susan, what's fascinating here is how the mayors, these Democratic mayors, are being pressured. They're being pressured on both sides because these city councils are way to the left of the mayors. We see it here in D.C. I mean, the veto override of Muriel Bowser was 12-1. It wasn't like there was a big divide. The progressives have made a lot of progress on these city councils, but they haven't been able to win mayor's races, but it's really put mayors in the crosshairs.
Well, and in fairness, they're talking a lot about social justice issues and police reform and the need for that, and we see the need for that over and over again in some of the shootings of unarmed black men, which continues across this country. But to make it a choice between crime and social justice is a real problem for Democrats, and I think you see with Joe Biden's decision on where he stands on this, that is his re-election announcement. On this issue of crime and on border security, he has in recent weeks moved to shore up what would have been the strongest issues against him in a re-election campaign.
And so far, the left's been muted on this. Even on immigration, you hear the complaints in press releases, but you're not hearing elected officials do it.
Coming out on TV, doing the whole thing, doing the whole circuit. You know, and I would be curious as to Secretary Johnson's perspective on this. I would say to your point, though, when it comes to the issue writ large, Democrats, I think, truly are looking to get on offense on this. You mentioned something that I've heard that they're looking to do, which is talk about, for example, the assault weapons ban that President Biden wants. It has truly pragmatically virtually no shot in Congress as it is laid out right now. Funding I've heard about for the COPS program, et cetera. But you also have Democrats who are pointing to, for example, Matt Gaetz going out at CPAC this weekend and saying, let's abolish the FBI, let's abolish the ATF, and hoping to use that as a wedge issue as well.
So yeah, I pretty much pre-criticized that clip, although Hallie Jackson at the end also, in addition to the gun issue, taking guns off the streets or whatever to make America safer, that's the only argument that Democrats have to avoid being labeled soft on crime rather than tough on crime. And like I said, it should be smart on crime and looking at the actual facts and the studies and what prevents crime, and also rebutting this whole idea that progressive prosecutors and progressive policies are responsible for the rise in crime after the beginning of the COVID pandemic, which just doesn't pan out if you look at that Brennan Center article I talked about at the beginning. But the other thing that Hallie Jackson pointed out there is that there's this additional issue where some Republicans are actually like, defund the FBI, abolish the FBI. So they're like, defund the police, abolish the police when it comes to the agencies that go after Trump or go after the January 6th insurrectionists. And all of a sudden there's a part of the Republican Party that is radical on the issue. But finally, the last clip I want to show is the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary, panel discussion on this issue. Donna Brazil is the only person on all these news programs of the big five corporate outlets who brings up any of the really relevant issues. I did edit out a little of this where New Jersey Governor Chris Christie was responding to a previous point about whether Biden campaigned vigorously in 2020 or not. And I just stuck to the main issue, and I'll talk about that a little more after we watch this final clip together over here.
Not helpful to him. The D.C. crime bill came up this week. Mariana, the president was pretty clear that he wasn't going to buck that legislation. That he was more concerned about crime than D.C. statehood.
Yeah, and to your point about reading out of the same hymnal, that is very hard, and that is a key example. I mean, on Wednesday, again, Biden trying to tell House Democrats we can do this together, only to go in the next day and tell senators, oh, I'm actually going to go and allow this vote to happen. I'm not going to veto it. And he did not say that to House Democrats. And that has caused a lot of anxiety, a lot of mistrust to the White House and Biden himself, because at the time of that vote, he said, you know what, D.C. should be able to make their own decisions. I'm not getting involved in this, only to go back and now say, you know, kind of really try and counter those Republicans' attack on Democrats.
George, let me bring something. I want to say something about home rule. Huge mistake. Huge mistake by the president.
Mistake?
Absolutely. Let me tell you why. I sat down because Chris Christie told me about this a couple of months ago. The D.C. Code is old. It was written in 1901. There, in some areas, there are no penalties for sexual assault. There's only 3 months when you beat up a police officer. So while I understand that some Republicans want to show they're tough on crime by beating up on the District of Columbia, we deserve statehood. We deserve to get it right. And this was a process that took 16 years. It was evaluated by criminal justice experts. It was evaluated by the D.C. Council and the D.C. residents. And all of a sudden, Marjorie Taylor Greene and a few others have decided that this is the issue where they want to pick on the District of Columbia. There's a reason why he didn't open his mouth and say something in that House caucus. And that is because my Congresswoman, and yes, she's a little bit in her 80s too, she would have stood up and said, hell no. This is about state rule. It's about the D.C. Council. The mayor vetoed it. Let the mayor and the council work this out. The president should not be engaged in D.C. affairs.
But could he afford to have the crime issue front and center all through the 2024
It should be front and center, because you know what? We have a crime wave, and it's not just in blue states, it's in red states, red cities, blue cities. It's a wave that we should stop. When I read the CDC report the other day, about 1/3 of teenage girls have considered suicide. We need to have a conversation about mental health, about crime, and look at the holistic approach, not just pick on one city.
I agree with that, by the way. And the crime issue is going to be front and center in this campaign, because if you travel around the country, if anyone saw the interview with the FBI director this week, but he said that crime is through the roof across the country, and that he's dealing with state and local law enforcement officials who are throwing their hands up at how bad things are right now in every section of this country. So this is not something that's going to be able to be handled just by passing the D.C. crime bill. Like, do I think he should do what he's doing? I do. But the point is, it's not going to take the issue off the table. I understand what you're saying, that it would make it even worse.
It doesn't
if
make
he
it
didn't.
worse. That's
but it doesn't get rid of the issue for him.
I think that's totally fair. We've talked a lot about.
So yeah, that's the final clip. Donna Brazil comes closest to talking about the important facts that were left out by so many of the news programs. You saw she talked about how crime, to the extent crime is up, it's up both in red and blue areas, and it more has to do with the pandemic. And it seems like Chris Christie almost agreed with that, but maybe not. Anyway, that was the last of the clips that I picked out for you today. If you like what I'm doing here, there are links under the video where you can support the program financially through Patreon or PayPal, or you can just give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, or give me supportive comments. Do whatever you can to show that you want me to keep doing this. I am going to keep doing it all the way through the 2024 election. That seems to be one of the topics this week. And anyway, I hope you enjoyed the extra commentary I gave this week on this whole tough on crime, soft on crime, smart on crime issue, because there's a lot of simplistic coverage in all of the media, as I showed this week. But if you really delve into the issues closely, you can see that putting people in cages, mass incarceration, that's not soft on crime. Or it's not soft on crime to oppose mass incarceration and putting people in cages and over punishment and over policing. Those are not, they, like, emotionally, politically, maybe things that, it may help politicians to get elected to focus on those types of simplistic solutions, but in the long term, they make the problem worse. They don't solve the real root causes, and I hope you look into the issues more closely yourself and find the real solutions to crime don't come from policing and guns and cages. And anyway, that's why I spent some extra time on the program this week, and you can let me know what you think in the comment section. I appreciate the live viewers who showed up this week. Also, for the recorded show viewers, I may, especially if you disagree with what I'm saying, post your comments, and I think this week I may have some time to argue with the recorded show viewers if you want to have that kind of argument. Anyway, I don't know if I created something this week that I can edit down to a shorter video. I might do that. I might not. I'll check it out, see what I feel like after I look at this later in retrospect. And anyway, whether I do that or not, I will be back next Monday and every Monday through the 2024 election cycle. And until then, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.